Let's make the Travis Scott action figure part 2. So after part 1, I went on to texturing. Obviously, getting his tattoos was an important part. It was way harder than I thought. There was not many photos, like detailed photos of his tattoos. So I kind of ended up just like taking screenshots of like different angles of his tattoos, whether from the action figure or from his body, and warping them back to as flat as I could and kind of patching different angles together to create the overall image, so I can trace them. It's not about getting an amazing drawing of the tattoo, but I did want to have them as complete and as nice looking as possible. And I just ended up doing all that for all of the rest of the tattoos. Then I went to Substance Painter, and I knew it was going to be pretty straightforward. Most of the stuff is going to have this like plastic darker skin color, and just adding the right imperfections was key. You know, it's a pretty smooth surface, but obviously there's so many micro imperfections, tiny bits of bump maps and normal maps, and obviously like roughness maps. It was really simple and subtle, but it's what makes it look really, really cool. The final render, I ended up cranking up the level of roughness and bumps. Maybe a bit too much. You'll see in the final render, maybe a bit too much, but honestly, it looked better than being smoother. So I just decided to push it more to the rough side. And what I liked is that I had to like paint it how you would paint the toy itself, you know, just like get all these different parts and just paint over them. You know, it wasn't, the painting wasn't that sophisticated. It wasn't much layering. I think in the original toy, it was just like very opaque, solid colors. So, you know, I didn't want to go too crazy layered and sophisticated with it. Eventually I went back and I did add a little bit of like dirt maps on the crevices. Very subtle, but it added a bit of extra depth to it. It was pretty subtle, but... And I pasted the base material to all the rest of the body parts, edited what I needed to edit. For the pants, they were kind of leather pants, but they had a weave type pattern or knit type pattern. So I just added a cotton knit pattern, but made it super glossy and black, so it feels leathery. I might have overdone the glossiness, but you know, I think it looks cool. And you know, I added some extra roughness to the bump on top of it just to break it up even more, and I also added some creases to just add more crease detail. Even though I sculpted it in, I wanted to add some more in the texture. And for the boxers, you know, I just added a simple wool texture, 2 different colors, and I used the ID maps for separating them, which is just like the poly group from ZBrush exported as a texture. pendant was pretty simple, you know, just adding the color and painting in the metal maps. So you'll just get metal on the edges, which will be this gold texture, and then the rest will just be like shiny, I guess plastic. So all the colored areas are just kind of shiny plastic or some kind of a painted metal. And once I was done with that, I tried to paste it onto the other one, but for some reason it didn't work, even though both pendants had the same UV maps. So I didn't bother. I just ended up applying the same exported texture on the second pendant in Cinema. So here you'll see that the second pendant is just like red, but in Cinema I ended up adding the same textures I exported to this one. And then I imported all the tattoos and I just dragged them on as decals and placed them. It was really simple to do. There were some tricky parts where they would kind of have to spread on a pretty significant curve. So on his torso, there weren't many crazy curves, but mostly on his arms and forearms. It would have to like wrap around half of his arm and it wasn't being very friendly. So yeah, you can see here how the edges kind of tend to like stretch once it gets over like a really significant curve, and it was worse on the other arm. I just ended up like scaling down the textures and playing with the Z space and with the projection space, like the projection length. But yeah, usually if like nothing worked, I just ended up scaling the texture down a little bit so it wouldn't spread as much. For the eye, as I said in the previous video, I ended up adding the middle part. Here, it's still missing that part, but once I rendered it, it didn't feel black enough, so I just ended up filling in the polygons and painting them black. Then in Cinema 4D, I just transferred all the maps, textured it. I ended up using the albedo map as a subsurface scattering medium because, you know, I mean, plastic has subsurface scattering, and I figured that I'll just make it really subtle, and I prefer that look. Then I just pasted the same thing over all the rest of the materials and replaced all the maps. You know, this is kind of the tedious work that's just like repetitive and kind of boring, but you have to do it because Substance Painter doesn't have an option to export like an Octane. I saw that they have like an option to export as a Redshift material, which might make it easier for using Redshift. But here I just have to, with Octane, I just have to like manually place all the maps. I used a gold and aluminium material from my metal pack, which is just like really cool textures. I used really subtle, kind of cleaner versions. But yeah, if you need procedural metal materials for Redshift or Octane, you know, check out my Gumroad. Now you can finally see how it looks, and immediately I went back to fix up the eyelids. It really bothered me. It didn't look horrible, but it also definitely didn't look great. So yeah, I just kept going back to ZBrush every now and then and, you know, fixed up the eyelids. God damn, they look so bad. But I think for the next week I'm just gonna be doing eyelids, just sculpting eyelids, you know. You know, I have to get it right. I can't be like struggling with it every time I sculpt something, because, you know, once you're in it on like a big project, you can't be stuck on tiny detail. Like, you can't be like bogged down by details like that. You already have so much on your plate. Yeah, I really do have to get my eyelids right. If you like this content and want to support the channel, feel free to check out my Patreon or membership, where you can find these project files, watch these videos with no ads, get free products from the store, as well as other cool perks, but mostly help me make more and better content for y'all. Also, you can buy this model, as well as other material and model packs on my new plastic Gumroad, and also buy prints and pins I made on the Pink Eye Gumroad. And I totally understand that not everyone can support that way, but even subscribing helps the channel, or giving me a follow on Instagram at Ojang, or the channel at Brand New Plastic. And if you want to help build a community, share your work, and just fuck around, join our Discord. I'll leave the link in the description. Either way, I really appreciate you. So at this point I started adding the splines for the braids, and at first I just, you know, used the octane tag on 2 spiral splines and activated the hair option that it kind of renders them as hair. And I just used a spline wrap deformer to wrap those splines on top of the main like braid spline. But I didn't really like how it looked, so I ended up actually creating a mesh with like a sweep on those splines. So it was actually like a mesh spline wrapping on the main braid spline. And then I just copy pasted it all over his head to kind of fit each braid base from his skull. The cool thing about this technique is that now I can use the spline that is guiding the braids and apply rope dynamics on it. At first I didn't think I would do it, but I ended up doing it. So you'll see that later on. Yeah, and you can see here that I added the black parts of his eyes, which ended up looking great. I also ended up adding more noise detail on the bump maps, just to add more kind of, just to break it up even more on a less micro fine level, which I think it looks better. It might be overdoing it, but I think it looks better. So this is where I decided to complicate this even more and added dynamics to the braids so they kind of move around as the character is moving. It was pretty straightforward but tedious as fuck. I turned on rope dynamics for each spline. I created a null at the base of each spline and connected the spline to the null object with a rope belt. Then I made sure the head has a collider tag on it, and after upping the substeps and the drag in the simulation settings, it was looking pretty damn good. Which meant it was ready for rigging. Rigging was kind of tricky because, like I said, I wanted to have the ball and socket type joints so the whole thing moves like an actual toy and the joints don't stretch like there's skin on them. But the bottom parts has pans, which means it needs to be a classic like skin deforming rig. I've never done a ball and socket rig, and I've definitely never had a combination rig, so I knew it was going to be a bit challenging. But honestly, a ball and socket rig is really simple. It's literally just adding an IK rig to each limb. But first I had to send the whole character to Mixamo to quickly skin rig it. And you can see the rigging is fine, but it just doesn't make sense that those joints will warp like that. So what I did is I left only the joints of the bottom half, including the hips. So the Mixamo rig only affects the bottom half of the character. Then I adjusted all the axis points of the upper limbs so they rotate the right way, and set up IK rigs on all of them, including the head and the torso. And after cleaning it up, solving some glitches and issues, and setting up controllers for all the joints, I ended up with this Frankenstein rig that's half skin, half ball and socket, which honestly I was really excited about. I just love the way the hands and the head and torso move around, especially with the braids moving around dynamically. This turned out really sick. At this point, I was kind of coming to an end, but I was still super annoyed by how his face turned out, so I ended up going back off camera to fix up mostly the eyelids and stuff like that, and after adjusting the lighting, this is the final results. Lots of details here, from texturing to the rigging. I still can't believe how this easy project ended up getting bigger and bigger. Part of me really loves it, and part of me is really annoyed by just, I don't know, how much I have to learn. There's a lot of stuff I feel like I could have done better, especially with his face. I don't know, maybe I just stared at it for too long. But yeah, I'm happy. This was fun and tough. Next is recreating the cover of Rodeo, which should be pretty straightforward now that the character is all ready, but you know, it always seems easy at first, and then, oh boy. You can buy this model rigged and textured along with the ZBrush tool and Substance Painter project on my Gumroad. Check out the prints and pins on my other Gumroad, or consider supporting on Patreon and membership to get access to all these project files along with other cool ass perks. And a big shout out to all my beautiful patrons and members you see on the screen right now. I love you. Have a great day. Peace.